Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Navy League's annual Sea Aerospace Conference and Trade Show outside Washington, D.C. in National Harbor, Maryland, where our coverage is sponsored by Fincantieri, Huntington Ingalls Industries, and Leonardo DRS. And we're over here at Liquid Robotics, a Boeing company, to talk to Gary Gysin, the company's CEO. Gary, always great seeing you. Thanks very much for taking time with us.
Sure.
You guys are always... there's always something new with what you guys are doing. I see you've got some copper coating there for anti-fouling, so that's always good and lightweight and inexpensive coating, but I'll get to that in a minute. I want to start, you've talked about sort of what the Waveglider and the series of sea surface vehicles that you guys have is sort of one of the nodes in a continuum in the architecture the Navy wants from space all the way to the bottom of the ocean. And this is a node that would help connect a whole series of undersea assets to the sea surface and then what's above it. Talk to us about some of the integration work you guys are doing. You're part of Boeing. We talked to Chris Raymond and he talked a lot about the company and how all the disparate pieces, commercial and military, come together. Talk to us about what you're doing within the Boeing ecosystem, but also then outside with the Navy to sort of create this sort of transparent oceans architecture that the Navy wants.
Yeah, sure. So the acquisition's a little bit over a year old, and the good part of this is we're part of the Autonomous Systems group of Boeing. And what we've been doing from a technology perspective is integrating the various pieces. So if you talk about seabed to space, Boeing has Echo Voyager, they've had ScanEagles, they have P-8s, they have all these defense assets to go detect threats, interdict on threats, satellite communications as well. But what was missing was that surface of the ocean connectivity layer, and effectively the Waveglider is providing that connectivity. So we're doing integrations with all those assets. Argon is a sensor supplier that's part of that portfolio. We've got those sensors on the platform. And so we're doing these not just to do it from a technical perspective, but because customers are demanding that we do it.
And one of the great attributes of the Waveglider, for anybody who doesn't know the Waveglider, check out videos on it because it's very, very cool. It's a sea-powered, solar-powered, persistent vehicle, and the great attribute of it is it's persistent.
That's right. So we can stay at sea up to a year. The latest version that we've just introduced will survive up to sea states, even sea state 8. Reliably, and so that's a hard thing to do. You're talking about the North Sea, you're talking about the Roaring Forties, you're talking about really challenging areas, but that's something that we're very proud of.
And a couple of years ago, you were saying that you guys were going to get to that level, which is pretty impressive. As somebody who sails, you know, I certainly don't want to be sailing in weather like that. Although I'm willing to go along with somebody who's very, very experienced doing it. Certainly not on my own. Talk to us about the copper coating that you guys now have on the vehicle. You guys were talking about doing stuff like that. Talk to us, because that's also very, very heavy. As a boating guy, that puts a lot of, it's amazing how heavy that is. And what kind of challenge that then causes on the vehicle, right? It's an advantage, but it's also a potential penalty.
Well, the weight side of it's not so much a penalty. I mean, it's a big advantage for us because the issue with a Waveglider is it can operate up to 5 years, 10 years, et cetera, as long as you have regular maintenance. And so it's like servicing a car. And the biggest issue is biofouling. And so we've experimented with different composites, different materials. This copper composite has been fantastic. So we've been getting missions of 6-9 months. We pull the vehicles out for servicing. They're fairly pristine, hardly any biofouling on the vehicle, and we're good to go. So that's something, it doesn't end a mission, it slows the vehicle down when you get a lot of biofouling, and so we just want to solve that problem if we can, which is what the copper composite's doing.
And so it's a copper, so my mistake, if you're just going with copper paint, that's what's really, really heavy, but you guys are doing something different then.
That's right, yeah. No, it's a composite material that we put together, and so our guys have been experimenting with different materials for the last several years to try to get it right, and we think we've got it licked.
Can you make a new boat hull for me on a custom basis? We shouldn't be discussing work on that. Well, let me take you to a more serious question.
Sure.
We talked to Sam Bendet. He is a Center for Naval Analysis analyst. He's part of the Crack Russia team over there. And one of the things he was talking about was the Russians have, it's no secret that the Russians have been using Syria as a testing ground for a whole vast array of systems, whether it's for their cruise missiles, whether it's for command and control nodes, cycling officers through there as well to get real-world operational experience. But one of the other things is unmanned underwater vehicles that are being used.
Sure.
And the Russians have made no secret, for example, about what they want to do, for example, up in the North Pole area and in the Arctic, to be able to have sort of persistent surveillance, persistent undersea surveillance with unmanned systems. From the standpoint of somebody who's in this business, what does that mean to you? How does that affect your thinking? How do you think, as somebody who's very expert in this field, should affect national thinking when it comes to a peer competitor who is working on capabilities that we historically have seen as sort of things that America is good at?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's a wake-up call. It's a big wake-up call. So you're seeing announcements from other nations that are talking about not just autonomous capability, but AI capability added on top of these autonomous things. And if we don't keep pace with that innovation and put the investment and the funding behind that, battles could be lost based on this capability. So we're quite worried about it. I get asked as CEO of this company a lot who our competition is, and it's not other players in our specific market, it's other countries that are really putting big wood behind the arrow to develop autonomous systems, surface, underwater, aerial, and in particular AI. I think it's going to be a real worry for us.
Well, so talk about AI, right? The Chinese state plan is 20% of a giant country's research and development investment is going to go into AI.
That's right.
We talked to one of your advisors, the former First Sea Lord, Sir George Zambellis, and was formerly the head of the UK Royal Navy, who said that we'll know China's lead less from intelligence intercepts than we will just seeing the kind of commercial products that China's putting out. From your standpoint, how does that change the game? How does that change the game for us? Because AI is a critical component of what it is you're doing.
That's right.
It's going to be increasingly a critical component of war fighting, but once again, another wake-up call situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, from a commercial perspective, you see a lot of innovation, a lot of startups, especially where we are out in the Silicon Valley, lots of AI companies that are starting, but commercial. Not so much on the defense side. There's a lot of innovation that's happening on the commercial side and pockets of it that are discrete, not necessarily combined together. The thing that worries me, of other countries that are harnessing all of the might of their budget behind a single effort, that's frightening.
Said the man with a lot of experience in Silicon Valley. From Silicon Valley perspective, The Economist had kind of an interesting story, because I know you've been out there for a very long time.
Sure.
And been with this company for a while as well. Has Silicon Valley's era passed to China? Because there are those folks who say that, look, it's sort of interesting that the Chinese are actually better Silicon Valley now, or parts of China are better Silicon Valleys now than Silicon Valley is.
It's a great point. So there was an article published about 2 months ago where there was a delegation that happens annually, where you have folks coming from, in particular, this was about China, visiting Silicon Valley and being wowed and in awe of what was going on. This particular article had mentioned that this year's delegation came away actually disappointed, thinking that the Chinese are farther ahead than we are. Again, that's a wake-up call.
So what are some ways, from your standpoint, to change that as somebody who's been in the cutting edge tech field for your entire career? What's the way to fix that?
Well, I think from what we can control, a big effort that's going on, and this starts from Dennis Muhlenberg on down throughout the Boeing organization. He gets it. He gets autonomy, he gets AI, he gets it, that's the future, and that's where Boeing has got to be in the next 100 years. And so there's a huge amount of investment in the Boeing company going into this, and we're participating in that, sitting on the councils, trying to take advantage of that software development for our platform, and I think that's going to be huge. That's something we can control. As a nation, we've got to think bigger than discrete projects and really get a national program together to combat this.
You were talking a lot to the last administration about innovation agenda, what the challenges were, things to do to improve it. You're talking to this administration as well,
yeah.
Which is trying to make agility a byword. There is a little bit of concern about whether or not this is actually going to incur costs in a couple of years, but I think everybody's pretty energized at at least the notion of being able to move more quickly.
Sure.
Again, we'll see in a couple of years if we move more quickly, doing a whole bunch of quote, failing fast that end up angering lawmakers, which is why we always end up in an overregulated position anyway. But from your standpoint, is it the right rhetoric? Are they focused on the right priorities? Insofar as you can tell us, what's the guidance, the advice you're passing along to Hondo Gertz and Will Roper, folks who you've known for a long time anyway, given that they've been in, Ellen Lord, certainly a colleague that you knew from industry. What are you hearing and what are you telling them about what's the right way to go?
Yeah, so I think the encouraging thing from the folks you had mentioned in particular is that they are also getting it, and they're seeing where the future is, and they're driving dollars towards those types of investments. And so we are involved in many of those different programs. There is change. This is hard. It's a cultural change. And so anytime you change culture from big things, aircraft carriers, big aircraft, to autonomous things that are networked together that provide intelligence, that's a sea change, to no pun intended, to change the thinking of how acquisition people, requirements people, anybody in the U.S. Navy and Department of Defense in a larger perspective, think about getting these technologies in and how important they are. And so I'm encouraged by the leadership and the change that we're seeing. It needs to go faster. From our perspective, we always say the pace of this has got to go faster. And again, back to the other nations that really are putting wood behind the arrow, we've got to go faster. But I'm encouraged by the change in thought leadership I'm seeing from the new leaders in the administration.
And one last question on international sales, or rather international leasing, right? You were saying that this is less going to be about people buying this as it is going to be sort of getting that service from you. Talk to us where you are on that, because there's, we think of you guys as predominantly as a military thing, but actually a lot of it is tremendously commercial in its application.
That's right. Actually, this year our revenue is going to be split about 50-50 between commercial and defense. We're in 20 countries now, so we're expanding like crazy. Asia is a huge growth area for us. And basically the other thrust of what we're doing that's large is broad category environmental assessment. Basically, how strong are the currents, how big are the waves, the wind speed, the water temperature, and so why. It's not for conservation purposes, it's for shipping purposes. So anytime a Navy is going to run an operation, an oil and gas outfit is going to run an operation out to an oil rig, they need to know what are the conditions in the local area. So example, Japanese Coast Guard is a very large customer of ours. They're using wave gliders around Japan, around the districts of Japan, to feed their weather models to improve forecasting for fishermen, even tourists, for their Navy, et cetera, for commercial shipping. So it's a really important area. And then the good part is, once these platforms are out there, you can add different sensors. They're not special purpose platforms, so we can add all sorts of different sensors on the platform as we go.
Gary, thanks very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And one of these days, really want to visit you guys out in California to see what you guys do, and actually, get out there and see, and see a wave glider gliding across the waves and doing its mission.
Well, that'd be hard to do in Sunnyvale, but if you want to come to our Hawaii facility, we're good.
Thanks very much, Gary.
All right, good.